Hi, so in this video we're going to talk about MIDI routing and how to set Midicake ARP up to talk via MIDI to different synths. In this case I'm going to use the Nord lead. The Nord lead has 4 synthesizers in it, so it's a good example of showing how each of ARP's 4 tracks can control a different instrument. So let's start at the beginning. ARP has 2 MIDI DIN ports, a MIDI in and a MIDI out. It also has a USB host and USB MIDI. Both of those USB ports both send and receive MIDI messages as well. So let's start by grabbing a MIDI cable, and I'm going to plug this from the MIDI out on ARP into the MIDI in on the Nord lead. Now, as I say, the Nord has 4 synthesizers, A, B, C and D. And these are set up each on a different MIDI channel. So as you can see, A is on channel 6, B is on channel 7, C 8 and D 9. So let's select channel A, and this is the sound. If I hit play on ARP, nothing happens. ARP is actually outputting MIDI notes, but on what channel? If we come into set mode and hit the MIDI out button, you'll see it's outputting MIDI out channel 1. Now we want to match that up to the synthesizer, and we want to play synthesizer A, and so that's on MIDI port 6. Now when we play, it's going to play channel 6, and the Nord lead is listening on channel 6. Likewise, if we want to play on a different synthesizer, on the same track, track 1, we can go into set mode, set the channel to 7, and we're now playing synthesizer B, synthesizer C, synthesizer D. So let's set it back to synthesizer A, and then on each of the tracks we can set the MIDI channel. So track 2, we're going to set that to 7, track 3 we're going to set that to 8, track 4 we're going to set that to MIDI channel 9. So now each of these is going to play, if we set it to follow, synth 1, synth 2, synth 3 and synth 4, and we can play them in parallel. So let's introduce another synthesizer. I'm going to bring in the Blofeld. Now the Blofeld, it has a USB MIDI in, and it also has a single MIDI input. So how can we connect ARP to play both the Nord and the Blofeld? We could daisy chain. We could come out of ARP into the MIDI in, out of the MIDI out of the Nord into the Blofeld. That'll work. But it does actually cause us a problem if we want to use the MIDI out on the Nord lead for something else. So what we can use is a MIDI splitter device like this, which has, in this case, 1 in and 3 outs. And so what this will do is it'll take the input from ARP or another input device and split it down 3 different MIDI cables. Simple as that. But what it means is that the MIDI information that's coming in is the same information is going out on all 3 ports. So here I've got 2. I've got the blue and the yellow output. And what I'll do is I'll take the white cable and I'll put it into the input of our MIDI splitter. And I'll leave it there so we can see it. So the other end of those cables, I'm going to take the yellow cable and plug it into the Blofeld, and I'm going to take the blue cable and plug it into the MIDI in of the Nord lead. So what we have now is ARP coming out on the white cable into the splitter, and then the yellow coming through to the Blofeld and the blue coming through to the Nord. And we need to figure out what track the Blofeld is playing on. So we could look through the menus, or we could just simply, on track 1, select the MIDI out port and then just cycle through until we find it. How do we know it's the Blofeld playing? We could just change the patch. And so we know that channel 5 is the one that's being listened to by the Blofeld. Let's tidy up a little bit. There, I've tidied up my cables a bit. So now what we could do is take channel 1 and put it on channel 6, so we're playing the Nord lead again. But channel 2 will this time, we'll put it on port 5. Sorry, channel 5. So now channel 1, or track 1, is playing MIDI out on channel 6, playing the Nord, and track 2, MIDI out on channel 5, playing the Blofeld. Ah, I see my mistake. I've plugged the blue cable into the MIDI out port. You can't do that because we're now going from a MIDI out into a MIDI out, and it's just not going to work. There. Now if we play on channel 1, we're playing this. And track 2 to the Blofeld as well. And that's essentially it. We can control 4 different instruments on 4 different channels. In this case, 2 different synthesizers. They could be 4 completely different synthesizers. So next, what about input? How do we get chord information, or note and chord information, into ARP from an external device, such as a keyboard? Well, the first thing we could do is take a MIDI keyboard. This happens to be a USB MIDI keyboard. And so what I'm going to do is just plug that into the USB host port of Midicake ARP. And that will not only receive data, and send data, of course, but in this case receive data, but it'll also power the MIDI controller in this case. And so what does that give us? Well, the idea is to be able to play the keys and have that trigger ARP, or at least set the chords for ARP while it's playing. So how does that work? So it should be receiving MIDI data now. And you can see, in fact, ARP is lighting up here to show you that it's receiving MIDI data. But this is sending on one of the MIDI channels. I'm not sure which. Let's set it to channel 15. Then, if we come into set mode in ARP, we need to tell ARP to listen on channel 15. And to do that, we come into the menu and we cycle through the menu until we find MIDI input channel. Currently it's off, it's not listening to anything. But let's set this all the way up and put it to 15. So now, as we play notes, it's going to read that information. And because we've got live play enabled, again through the menu, live play is on. I'll turn it off for now. We're going to get the sound out because the input here is setting the chord here. And it was live playing, now it's not. So we can take any chord and input it. And that will be our chord selection. And what it does is it just sets the note for the pool that are going to be played by the sequences that trigger that then subsequently play the synthesizers. So let's hit play. Let's turn off a couple of channels so I can hear what's happening. That's all well and good. But what if we wanted to use our synthesizer keyboard instead? So we can leave that where it is, happily inputting on channel 15. But let's have a look at the setup on the Nord lead. As you can see, the global MIDI output channel is set to 16. It's channel 16. So any notes that we play on here are going to be output on that channel 16. Now currently that's set to play synthesizer A, but that information will also be sent out on the MIDI output channel. So let's plug the MIDI out of Nord into the MIDI in, that's that red cable, into the MIDI in of ARP. Now let's go back to our menu setup, and it was the MIDI input channel. Now remember, Nord is outputting on 16, so we need to set this to 16 as well. And now the notes that we play on here will appear here. And there you go. You have MIDI routing in both directions. For outputs, each track has a MIDI output channel. And for inputs, ARP has a MIDI input channel, which is accessible under the global menu. And yes, that's about it for MIDI routing. It's inputs and outputs. And so long as you've got your MIDI out connected to your MIDI in, unlike I did earlier, then everything should be hunky-dory. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Quick thumbs up below, and subscribe if you're new to the channel, because it helps us out. And yeah, I'll stop waffling and leave you to go and make some nice music. All right, cheers. Thanks very much.